y equals sine of x and y equals cosine of x. Now we're going to actually make these more complicated and throw some transformations in them. So we've got A, B, C, and D affecting how this graph is moved around. Amplitude, I told you, was the height of the graph. The absolute value of A determines the height of the graph. Determine the period or the length of the cycle, like I gave you that definition before too. For sine and cosine and cosecant and secant, the length of the parent graph is going to be 2 pi. But if I've got a transformation, just to find that, I'm going to do 2 pi over the absolute value of B. 3 and 4, I'm going to graph some easier ones to begin with, and then I'll go over 3 and 4. But to go ahead and just tell you how each of these is affecting the graph, C over B is going to determine the phase shift, or how I move the graph left to right, and then D determines how I move the graph up or down. That's my vertical shift. Alright, so the key to this is probably just know that you need 5 points. I'm going to only make you graph one cycle, so one period, so you just need to do 5 points, and my recommendation is just to start with 0 and then end with the period. Alright, and that's if no phase shift is involved, and I'll talk about that later if there is a phase shift. Then you just find the values and plot the points. So let's do a couple of examples here. Alright, so let's look at y equals 2 times the sine of x. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is find the amplitude. So the amplitude is just going to equal the absolute value of the leading coefficient, or the coefficient in front. So it's the absolute value of 2, which is just 2. So when you're done graphing this, you better look and see that your height is 2. Alright, then my period, remember for sine and cosine, it's 2 pi divided by whatever's in front, that coefficient in front of x. In this case, it's 1. So 2 pi over 1, or just 2 pi. Or we could make it really easy, and let's just do 360 degrees. Alright, so one cycle, the length of this graph is going to be 360 degrees. Alright, so if I'm graphing this, I'm going to pick 5 points. So I've got my x, and then I'm looking at 2 times the sine of x. Alright, so my 5 points, I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to stop at 360 degrees. Alright, there's 2 ways to pick your 5 points. One way just would be go, that's where I'm starting, that's where I'm ending, so I need a middle. I need the middle of that, and then the middle of the middle, basically. So 90, and then I've got 270. The other way I could do it is I could divide the period by 4. So I could do 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2, or 90 degrees, and that's what I'm adding each time until I get 5 points. So I've got 5 points there. Now, let's look at what's happening here. Remember that the sine of 0 is 0, okay? But now I've brought in this 2, so now I'm going to be multiplying, using my order of operations, I'm going to be multiplying that by 2. But 0 times anything is just 0, so that's going to stay 0. The sine of 90 degrees is 1, but when I multiply that by 2, that becomes a 2. 180 is 0, 360 is 0. So with the sine graph, I've got 3 zeros going on. And then this is going down to -1, but I'm multiplying that by 2, so that's going to be -2. Alright, so plotting this, like I said, I'm doing one cycle. So I'm going up to 2, down to -2, and I'm going from 0 to 360 degrees. Right, so I start at 0, 0, I go up to 2, back to 0, down to 2, back to 0. And so that graph looks like that. Okay, let's do another one. Alright, so my amplitude is 3, absolute value of A, just 3. Alright, my period for this one's going to be a little different, because it's going to be 2 pi divided by 6, which is pi over 3, or 60 degrees. Alright, so what does this mean? This means that I'm going to go a complete cycle within 360 degrees or 2 pi, I will have gone 6 times. Okay, that just means that one cycle is only going to take 60 degrees. My period's 60 degrees. Excuse me. Alright, so let's plot this. We've got y equals, I don't want that. Alright, so I've got my x, and I've got -3 times the sine of 6x. Alright, so let's look at these values right here. Alright, my values are not going to change. I'm still going to be going from 0, up 1, 0, -1, 0. Alright, I'm going to, let's list these out. So we're starting at 0. I'm ending at 60. Alright, if I divide that by 4, I could say I'm adding 15 each time. Or I could have done my middle thing. Completely up to you. Alright, so now I've got the sine of 0, which is 0, times -3 is 0. My zeros aren't changing. This is going to be 1 because the sine of 90 is 1, but I'm multiplying it by -3, so that's going to become -3. And then I've got the sine of 270, which is -1 times -3 is +3. Alright, so you remember when I told you this 0, 1, 0, -1, 0 are going to be important? Because if you know those, then you just know that you're transforming by multiplying by that first number. Okay? Alright, so let's plot this. Now, the only thing different about this graph is, and you should have recognized that anyway, I have a negative leading coefficient. So I'm flipping the graph. I'm reflecting the graph on the x-axis. So I'm going to 60 degrees here. Alright, so I've got 0, down to 3, back to 0, up to 3, back to 0. So, there you go.